no greater violence than to deny the dreams of our children. My only aim in life is that every child is free to be a child, free to laugh and cry, free to play and learn, free to dream.
Every year, 1 in 2 children experiences violence, exploitation, or abuse. Globally, that's over 1 billion children who don't feel safe, even around the very people they should trust the most. Children who live in fear, who will suffer lifelong consequences. Violence against children happens in every country. It happens at home, at school, in the community, and online. And now, a global pandemic has made this violence even more severe.
We're learning the pandemic is also impacting the number of child abuse cases.
At-risk kids may fall through the cracks as COVID-19 continues to keep children isolated at home.
But it is preventable. There are solutions. Working together, we can and will end violence against children. Together, we're working with governments, the private sector, and countless partner organizations to protect children and share strategies that work. From empowering school teachers to take a stand in the classroom, to compelling politicians to make child safety a national priority. Together, we're the solution, inspiring political will and financial support to make a difference in the lives of children. For a global problem, we need a global solution, a movement. We need you. We need all of us. Together.
We will continue our journey to our destination of peace and education. No one can stop us because we are all together.
A very warm welcome to today's launch of the Together to End Violence Campaign and Solutions Summit series. My name is Howard Taylor. I am the Executive Director of the End Violence Partnership, and I will be your host today. We have over 1,800 people joining us from 130 countries. That is a movement in and of itself and a demonstration of the necessary power of partnership. Welcome. The Together to End Violence Campaign and Summit series will showcase affordable, evidence-based solutions to end violence against children. It will elevate efforts to address violence against children, both during the COVID-19 pandemic and, critically, in post-pandemic planning and budgeting. And it will act as a platform to secure new political and financial commitments. In the next 90 minutes together, we will be informed and inspired by speakers from every continent and every sector who will share their perspectives, their vision, their calls to action. And in doing so, they'll shape the agenda as we all head into the decade of action on these Sustainable Development Goals. But we want to hear from everyone. So partway through today's event, there will be a live survey. You'll all get the chance to have your say. There is simultaneous translation available in English, French, and Spanish using the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. And you can follow live updates on social media. If you hear something which really resonates, which is really compelling from one of our youth advocates, from one of our leaders, please tweet it out. Please go on Facebook, Instagram, put it out there on social media. Let's tell the world what needs to happen to end violence against children. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be shared in full on the End Violence Partnership website. That's all the housekeeping done. Let's get going. Before we hear from leaders from royalty, UN agencies, government, faith networks, the private sector, civil society, we are first going to hear from our most important participants, youth advocates. I'm delighted to welcome Zara from Indonesia and then Sarafina from Ghana to open today's event. Zara.
Baik. Yang mulia, para pemimpin dunia, semua anak-anak, teman-teman saya, terima kasih atas kesempatan yang telah diberikan kepada saya. Perkenalkan, nama saya Zahra, 14 tahun dari Indonesia. Saya senang hadir di sini mewakili teman-teman saya di Indonesia. Seperti yang Bapak Ibu ketahui, bahwa pandemi ini merupakan situasi yang sangat berat bagi kita semua, terutama untuk anak-anak seperti saya dan teman-teman saya. Seperti halnya yang terjadi pada tetangga saya. Orang tuanya kehilangan pekerjaan karena pandemi. Dan akhirnya anaknya harus bekerja di pasar menjadi kuli angkut untuk membantu orang tuanya. Anak ini akhirnya tidak bisa lagi mengikuti sekolah online karena waktunya dipakai untuk bekerja. Ada juga yang mengemis di jalan, dan ada juga yang bahkan tidak mempunyai rumah. Saya merasa situasi ini tidak adil dan tidak boleh terjadi. Bukankah hak kami adalah memiliki mimpi besar? Bagaimana kami bisa mencapai mimpi tersebut jika kami tidak mendapatkan pendidikan? Saya dan teman-teman saya juga melakukan kampanye di media sosial tentang bagaimana cara mengakhiri kekerasan terhadap anak. Ini kami lakukan karena masih banyak masyarakat yang menganggap bahwa orang tua memukul anak itu adalah hal yang wajar terjadi. Harapan kami kepada para pemimpin dunia dan pemerintah Indonesia adalah untuk melakukan hal-hal berikut. Yang pertama, penegakan hukum yang lebih tegas. Yang kedua, memperluas jangkauan layanan pelaporan kasus kekerasan ke daerah-daerah yang terpinggirkan. Yang ketiga, memprioritaskan bantuan sosial selama pandemi untuk kebutuhan anak. Yang keempat, membuat layanan keluhan khusus anak yang bisa membuat anak menceritakan perasaannya selama pandemi. Together we can end violence against children. Terima kasih.
Hello everyone. I am Sarafina from Ghana, a young leader from World Vision, and I'm very honored to be taking part of this event. I am here representing children from my country and the world at large. Today, my main focus is on violence against children. Violence against children because growing up in my community and in the country, I have seen a lot of children facing various kinds of violence against children, and this includes child marriage, teenage pregnancy, and child labor. In my community, for example, most girls have faced issues of child marriage, in which with the help of my club, we were able to rescue these girls through soccer clinics, clubs, and then debating clubs. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to urge you all that don't let children to only be those to bring the problems out. Let them also be part of the solutions, because children are agents of change. On behalf of children, I also want to use this opportunity to bring out this grand challenge to all. Governments, leaders, political leaders, and all leaders across the world, we need more commitment to help end violence against children. We need more money to support programs that will help bring all kinds of violence against children to an end. And lastly also, we need collaboration between governments, students, children, parents, religious leaders, and all across the world to be able to bring all forms of violence against children to an end. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Zara and Sarafina. For children and young people everywhere, you have challenged us all to step up and do more. And you've reminded us of the critical role that young people play as advocates and as agents of change. You've informed and inspired action, and you take that locally, nationally, and internationally. Thank you so much for that powerful opening to our summit launch event today. We are going to hear from many leaders. They're going to share their views and their plans. And those leaders are in positions of influence to make a difference and to respond to the grand challenge which you have just set us. Let's hear from our first leader. Henrietta Fore is chair of the board of the End Violence Partnership and executive director of UNICEF. This year, of course, has been a year like no other with the COVID-19 pandemic, and UNICEF has been at the front line of the response to continue to protect children during the pandemic. Zara and Sarafina, you just challenged us all to step up and do more. Henrietta, good morning. My question to you, what's the situation that you see children facing? What's the opportunity you see to build back safer for children? Henrietta Fore.
Thank you very much, Howard. It is a very important moment for the world when we really can step back and see what we need to do for children. So I really strongly endorse your call for a movement. So thank you all very much for joining us as we take the next steps in our partnership to end violence against children, an epidemic that has grown far worse over the last year. 1 billion children experience violence every year. That shocking figure has grown even higher during the COVID-19 pandemic. Children are now at a much higher risk of violence, exploitation, and abuse. Economic shutdowns and physical distancing, school closures, and isolation pose serious threats to children's health, well-being, learning, and safety. At the same time, essential services, including critical violence prevention and response services for children, have been disrupted in more than 100 countries. Many children have nowhere to turn for help. And despite the many benefits of digital connectivity, a life lived increasingly online for learning, socializing, and gaming has also increased children's exposure to predators and potential exploitation and abuse. In short, unless we act together now, with a greater sense of urgency, COVID-19 will have implications for children's safety, health, and development that will linger long after the pandemic subsides. So, Howard, I think the case for action is clear. We know that violence against children is wrong. We know that it undermines all other investments in their health, their education, and their development. We know what works to stop it, and that our actions must be informed by listening to and working with young people, such as Zara and Sarafina. And we know that it makes economic sense to prevent it. The Together to End Violence Solution Summit series that we are launching today unites us all across continents and across sectors behind a single shared vision of a world where every child grows up safe and secure. Safe at home, safe online, safe to learn, and safe in their community. The Summit Series is an opportunity for us to work together and to turn this shared vision into a reality. It's an opportunity to raise awareness that ending violence is possible, an opportunity to share cost-effective, evidence-based solutions that can be scaled as governments and societies build back better and safer for children, and an opportunity to catalyze the leadership and the financial commitments needed to get on track to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 16.2 and end all violence and exploitation and abuse of children by 2030. So, Howard, let me end with a call to action. So as board chair of the End Violence Partnership, my call to action for leaders everywhere is this. The case for action is clear. The time for action is now. It is time to be bold in our ambition, to reimagine a world fit for every child and to build back safer for children from the COVID-19 pandemic. It's time to listen to and to work with children across sectors and remove constraints to progress. It's time to continue our journey of adaptation and innovation to protect children through and beyond COVID-19. Through our work at UNICEF, we've learned how to digitize some child protection services, to adapt child helplines, to increase the safety of virtual learning environments, and deliver positive parenting resources to all who need them. So let's learn from these experiences and let's scale them up to where they are needed the most. And finally, it's time for governments and donors and the international community to unlock the domestic and international funds needed to invest in the prevention and response programs that keep children safe from all forms of violence. Progress depends on investment, and there is no greater investment than a child's future, including protection from violence. So as I look forward to the discussion today, as we carry our commitment into 2021 and find new ways to end the scourge of violence against children in every country and every community, let's gather the power of a movement. Let's end violence against children. So thank you, Howard.
Thank you so much, Henrietta. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for all that UNICEF does across the world to protect children, and for that powerful call to action, and also for injecting a critical sense of urgency at the beginning of today's conversation. You've reminded us that ending violence against children isn't just the right thing to do, it's also possible. Solutions exist, and even in the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen innovation, which we must build on. We will hear more later from other speakers who will go deeper into some of the evidence-based solutions and the practical action that is necessary to end violence against children. And you also called, Henrietta, for more investment. And that's so important, because ending violence against children isn't just the right thing to do, and it isn't just possible. It's a smart investment to make. And I know we'll hear more from some other speakers about that. We're now going to move to hear from four governments who have adopted national action plans to end violence against children: the United Arab Emirates, Colombia, Japan, and Sweden. And these four governments are illustrative of more than 30 governments who have made that really bold political commitment as part of the End Violence Partnership to become what we call a pathfinding country. They commit to prepare and implement a national action plan, to use global best practice of what works, and to have those plans informed by data that shows them the local context in which children are living, learning, playing, and developing. We are going to hear first from Abu Dhabi, from His Highness Sheikh Zayed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates.
جلالة الملكة سيلفيا ملكة السويد، فخامة إفيان ماركيس رئيس كولومبيا، إخواني الوزراء، السيدات والسادة، يسعدني أن أكون بينكم اليوم في هذا اللقاء العالمي الإنساني الكبير الهادف لتعزيز العمل المشترك من أجل مستقبل أطفال العالم. أهداف كبيرة والعمل متواصل، ونحن مستمرون في تقديم الدعم لكل خطوة تمضي بالبشرية نحو بيئة أكثر أمانا للطفل، ومجتمع أكثر استقرارا، وأسرة أكثر تلاحما. الأسرة هي الكيان المقدس وخط الدفاع الأول عن الطفولة، وعند الحديث عن تقوية دعائم الأسرة لا بد من الحديث عن القوانين والتشريعات التي تضمن استدامة هذه الجهود، بحيث يتم النظر في إيجابياتها والعمل على تطويرها وتمكينها من تلبية متطلبات التطور المجتمعي والتقني لتتلائم مع التغييرات التي تواجهنا أو يمكن أن تواجهنا. وفي إطار توفير المنظومة الأمثل للحماية، فلا بد للحكومات من أن تكون قادرة على تطوير ودعم مبادرات وطنية لحماية الأطفال من خلال الأسرة ابتداء من المنزل، وتهدف إلى تقوية علاقة الطفل بأسرته ومحيطه ومجتمعه، كما تعمل على تفعيل دور المجتمع في حمايته. أطفال العالم يحتاجون إلى حياة تسودها علاقات سوية قوية ليتمكنوا من الانطلاق إلى العالم الخارجي. أختم كلمتي وكلنا ثقة بأن تتضافر جميع الجهود في سبيل تقديم كل من شأنه إحاطة الأطفال بالحماية الكاملة لنسير معا بثقة واقتدار من أجل مستقبل أطفال العالم.
Thank you, Your Highness, for sharing part of the United Arab Emirates' national progress and plans to accelerate an end to violence against children, and for calling out the criticality of a focus on the importance of families. We're going to go now to Bogota, Colombia. Our next speaker is a passionate advocate and activist for children, driving progress in her, including through a focus on cities as accelerators of change. And she's set an example of what's possible when leaders commit and take evidence-based action. It is my great pleasure to invite Her Excellency Maria Juliana Ruiz, the First Lady of Colombia, to share with us the progress and plans to end violence against children across Colombia. Your Excellency.
Good day to everybody. Zara, Zarafina, Howard, my warmest regards to you. It is truly an honor to be virtually connected with such an outstanding audience and being part of this exceptional group of speakers. Thank you so much. There is something that I really value about what brings us together, and is that our purpose has no political, religious, or ideological nonsense because ending violence against children is a worldwide human concern. And as Henrietta was saying, yes, it requires an urgent and concrete response that implies cooperative and multi-stakeholder approach, and I would like to highlight on that. And it's definitely that I would like to share a couple of things and some goals and actions that have been taken in Colombia. As part of our commitment to achieving the SDGs, we are looking to end all violence against children before 2030. Yes, this is an ambitious target, and we are really devoted substantially and working on introducing resources to really achieve this goal. The administration of President Iván Duque has committed to reduce the level of violence against children by 14.6% by 2022. And this will be the most significant decrease in violence against children in our country over a decade. Last year, we had for the first time the results of the VAC survey for Colombia, and we were very heartbroken by the situation and by the revealed information in which non-lethal forms of violence affect almost half of our children. And we got facts and data on different types of violence, such as sexual, psychological, physical, affecting differently, of course, boys and girls. And the fact that being able of identifying also that predators are often either relatives, family, friends, or peers was really shocking. Seeing that data really moved us. But the light of the evidence and being aware that no government can do this alone, President Iván Duque announced on 2019 a national alliance to end violence against children. And he did it jointly with the Colombian Institute for Family Welfare and the Presidential Office for Childhood and Adolescence. And I would like to highlight this alliance because it is based on the INSPIRE model. And that is really something that was important for us because we had the guide. And it was also reached by Colombia joining the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children last year. And we did it as a pathfinding country. We have invited and initiated a campaign throughout Colombia's society to adopt a zero tolerance approach. So now we'll go briefly on some of our key achievements that I would actually frame as prevention and solutions. And one that I really appreciate is the fact that the government National Action Plan has identified by now more than 100 initiatives in the country aligned to the INSPIRE model. Technical assistance is being provided to the 32 departments of our country, and we are really promoting the design of territorial plans aligned also with INSPIRE. It was developed a specific section on violence against children at the Ministry of Health. A gender-based violence information system is also being made. And we are working on the design of a violence predictive model, which is also very important from the preventive side. And something that I'm also proud of is normatively and legally speaking, this year, the life sentence for murderers and children abusers was approved. The project that establishes the imprescriptibility of sexual crimes against minors has already passed a presidential sanction as well. And the bill that seeks to prohibit physical punishment or cruel treatment against minors is awaiting the last debate at the Senate plenary session. Now, on capacity building and social approach, Colombia has committed to a loving parenting and play strategy. And installed capacity is being generated through the territory. This is something that Howard was mentioning. We are really focused on local action. And we have an extraordinary response, and we were successful on this action, even during the pandemic dynamic. So with Homeless, I must highlight that many of those achievements are thanks to the invaluable work and commitment of the social network, a social network that has been leading through our regions, through our departments, and I've been doing it with all my heart and putting at the whole purpose my capacities and my knowledge. I would say just my final words, and it would be that I'm not only convinced that Colombia has proved that only through collaborative and multi-stakeholder approach we can make a real impact in terms of prevention and attention to end violence against children in our countries. So today, from my capacity, I would pray for a call to action, and is that I would like to urge all First Ladies throughout the world to press into service, advocacy, and convening to lead in their countries the establishment of a national partnership based on zero tolerance against any forms of violence against children. Taking responsibility, regardless of our jobs or roles in society, on the well-being and protection of the next generations may be a legacy, but overall, it is a commitment to the present and a promise to our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for joining us today. And thank you for your leadership. Thank you also for the leadership of His Excellency, the President of Colombia, and for that very powerful and exciting call to action to First Ladies the world over to lean in to this agenda of ending violence against children. And you are emblematic of what can be achieved when that happens. You've done a great job today of summarizing some of the enormous amount of work and progress going on in Colombia. And the importance of the whole of government approach, the integrated multi-sectoral plan, the importance of evidence and the INSPIRE strategies, which we'll hear more about later as the global best practice of evidence, and of course the criticality of its data-driven. And you mentioned the Violence Against Children survey in Colombia, which has been such an important part of informing your government's response. We're so grateful for you joining us today. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. We're going to move now. We've been in the Gulf region, we've been in South America. We're now going to go to East Asia and to Japan. As well as making ending violence against children a domestic priority, the Japanese government is also an End Violence Against Children board member and a generous donor to the End Violence Partnership. And today we're going to hear from Japan's Parliamentary Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Satoshi Nakanishi.
ご列席の皆様、外務大臣政務官の中西聡でございます。まず、今回のイベント開催にあたりご尽力いただいた開催者の皆様および参加者の皆様に感謝を申し上げたいと思います。また、こうした困難な時期においても、各地で子どもに対するあらゆる形態の暴力の防止に取り組んでおられる GPE バックのリーダーシップに改めて敬意を表します。子どもに対する暴力は、子どもの心身の発達及び人格の形成に重大な影響を与えます。その防止は、社会全体で取り組むべき重要な課題であります。日本はこれまで子どもに対する虐待、搾取、取引およびあらゆる形態の暴力および拷問を撲滅するという SDGs のターゲット 16.2 の達成に向け、あらゆる努力を行ってきました。一例を挙げると、我が国は2019年に児童虐待防止対策を強化し、体罰を明確に禁止するために児童福祉法などを改正しました。本年の新型コロナウイルス感染症拡大の状況下においては、子どもの見守り強化アクションプランを策定し、地域のネットワークを総動員し、支援ニーズの高い子どもたちなどを見守る体制を確保することで、虐待を早期に発見し、措置を講ずるよう努めました。さらに、 パスファインディング国入りを表明した2018年のソリューションズサミット以降、作業を進めてきた子どもに対する暴力撲滅行動計画は策定の最終段階にあります。国際的には日本は子どもに対する暴力撲滅基金を通じて財政支援を行っています。この場をお借りしてウガンダとナイジェリアにおける事業が昨年成功裏に完了したことをお知らせいたします。この事業を通じ1900人以上の子どもがボコハラムなどから解放され、7万人以上の子どもや養育者などが心理的サポートを得ることができました。また4万2600人以上が地雷に関する研修を受けることができました。さらに日本は新型コロナウイルス感染症の影響を受けやすい国を支援し、より多くの子どもたちが質の高い医療サービスを受けられるよう、ユニセフに対して支援を行いました。日本はこうした努力を継続していきます。また他の国々がこうした取り組みに参加するよう呼びかけたいと思います。新型コロナウイルス感染症は人間の安全保障上の深刻な脅威です。国境を越えて広がり、子どもを含む社会的弱者を襲います。我々は新型コロナウイルス感染症対策としてだけでなく、あらゆる状況下において子どもに対する暴力撲滅のための取り組みを強化していく必要があります。すべての子どもが暴力のない中で育ち、将来への希望と夢を持てるより良い世界を築くため、本日のイベントが国際社会によるコミットメントを刷新する契機となることを心から期待しております。ありがとうございました。
Thank you so much, Minister Nakanish. It's great to hear of the progress and the plans being made by the government of Japan in Japan, but also Japan's international support, and particularly around the stepping up of the efforts on the prohibition of corporal punishment, a great reminder of the importance of legislation that is passed and implemented to protect children. Also what Japan has done to step up to protect children during COVID-19, and the imminency of the National Action Plan, which we can't wait to see. And let me just thank Japan again for your generous financial contribution through the End Violence Fund, which you spoke to. Our final leader from a pathfinding country is Åsa Lindhagen, Sweden's Minister for Gender Equality. Sweden is known for its progressive state-led approach to child protection and well-being, and it's a global leader on child rights and development. The government of Sweden is also a board member and a generous donor to the End Violence Partnership. And Stockholm, the government of Sweden, hosted the first Solutions Summit just over 2 years ago. Joining us from Stockholm today, it's a pleasure to invite Minister Lindhagen to share her perspectives and the opportunities she sees for action to end violence against children. Minister.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, Sarah and Sarafina, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I am honored for the opportunity to say a few words at this important event. Every year, violence against children affects 1 billion children, a horrible number, which contributes to lifelong negative consequences for families, communities, and of course, for children. As a global community, we have to step up our efforts to catalyze the political and financial commitment necessary to end violence against children for good. The impact of COVID-19, the heightened risk of violence that children now face has made these efforts more important than ever. Like men's violence against women, all violence against children is unacceptable and must be confronted with the full force of the global community. And this is not just something we wish or hope for. This is a promise we have made with the Sustainable Development Goals within Agenda 2030. We need to work harder to protect all children. Action plans to end violence must be inclusive in their design as well as implementation. No child shall be left behind. The Swedish government has been strongly dedicated to the work against corporal punishment for many years. Legislation and awareness raising to change social norms has led to a profound change in attitudes and behaviors in Sweden. But even though corporal punishment is no longer something that is perceived as natural for most people in Sweden, it is not enough. Violence and abuse still exist. There are children growing up feeling scared in their own home and feeling worthless and sad. No child should ever grow up feeling like that. No child. It is important to understand that corporal punishment in all its forms has detrimental effects on children's mental and physical health. And all children have the right to safety and protection. A home should be a safe place for all children. The fight for children's rights is our most important fight. We can never give up. In order to limit the effect the pandemic has on violence against children, we have taken several measures in Sweden. As one example, funds were channeled to civil society organizations on national level working to protect and support children who are subjected to violence. We will also analyze the different ways in which children are affected by the COVID-19 virus. This will measure how the lives of children has changed due to cancelled activities, the limited social contacts, and to some degree, closed schools. And recently, Sweden initiated the development of a national strategy on violence against children, including honor-related violence and oppression. I am confident that the meeting here today will inspire us to do more and to contribute to the mobilization that is so needed in order to reach the Sustainable Development Goal 16.2. In this work, the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children plays a very important role. It is imperative that we work together, and the partnership is a wonderful platform for this. Sweden has been a pathfinding country since 2016 and consider this an important part of our work to end violence against children. And I am happy to announce that recently my government decided to allocate funding to the Global Partnership, and I hope that many governments will do the same. Together we can achieve positive change on national, regional and global level, and together with children who are agents of change, as Serafina said to us. The fight to end violence against children is imperative, and it is time that we all step up and fulfill our promises, the promises we have made to the children of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister Lindhagen, both for your personal leadership domestically, what Sweden is doing internationally, and for the example Sweden has set. I think the first country to pass the corporal punishment legislation now some decades ago, but an honest reflection of the job is not yet done. We still have to keep on making sure that progress is happening. And thank you again for the generous recent contribution from the government of Sweden to the work of the End Violence Partnership. From the young people and the leaders we've heard so far today, I just want to pull out a few themes which are emerging as important aspects of solutions to end violence against children, even more critical during and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen and heard that ending violence against children requires bold ambition and leadership, political leadership. We've seen and we've had demonstrated by Zara and Serafina that listening to and involving children is vital. The interventions must be evidence-based, based on what we know works, and informed by data on the local context that children are living in. And legislation matters, including the prohibition of corporal punishment. We've just heard from Sweden, we heard also from Japan, and how important it is that legislation is not just passed, but it is implemented. And we've heard that money matters. The best will, the best intentions in the world, financial investment is needed. And the interventions which can end violence against children are a smart investment to make. It makes much better economic sense to prevent violence against children. From considering comprehensive nationwide approaches to ending violence against children in the United Arab Emirates, Colombia, Japan, and Sweden, we're now going to look in more detail at a very fast-growing form of violence against children: online child sexual exploitation and abuse. The internet, of course, provides many opportunities for education, innovation, entertainment, social connectivity, business growth, and more. But it also has enabled those who want to harm children, because it's made it easier for them to produce, to access and share child sexual abuse material, to find like-minded offenders, and to reduce their risk of detection. We're going to hear today from 3 leaders who are at the forefront of the fight to keep children safe online. We're going to start in Australia, then we're going to move east to Europe, and finally to the US. And we're going to hear from national and regional legislators and from a corporate leader. The government of Australia is among the most progressive and active in its approach to keeping all of its citizens, including children, safe online. It is, of course, the middle of the night right now in Australia, and so we're very grateful to Paul Fletcher, Australia's Minister for Communications, Cybersecurity and the Arts, for pre-recording this message for us all.
I'm Paul Fletcher, Australia's Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts. And I'm very pleased to be able to join this summit series as part of the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. One of the 3 priority areas is online activities of children. And that's an area that the Australian government takes very, very seriously. In 2015, we legislated to establish an office we now call the E-Safety Commissioner. And that senior Australian government official is charged with leading our efforts to keep our citizens safe online. And we've got a particular focus on keeping children safe online. The legislation that this official administers includes regimes dealing with cyberbullying directed against Australian children, and the E-Safety Commissioner has the power to receive complaints and to make orders against digital platforms, against social media companies, requiring that material determined to be cyberbullying directed at an Australian child is taken down. The internet, of course, is a wonderful resource for education, for economic activity, for keeping us all informed and entertained. It's enriched our lives. But just as a proportion of human interactions in the physical world can go wrong, sadly, a proportion of human interactions online also have negative and harmful consequences. And that's what we're working to prevent through the work of Australia's E-Safety Commissioner. Now, children, of course, are in particular need of support to keep them safe in all aspects of life, including when they're online. And as all parents and anybody who has anything to do with children know, children spend a lot of time online. And of course, that brings them many benefits, but we need to make sure we're keeping them safe. Now, today I can announce the results of some new research recently carried out by Australia's E-Safety Commissioner, which found, troublingly, that in around a quarter of all cases involving domestic violence, there's an element of online abuse, of technologically facilitated abuse. A classic way in which this happens is where monitoring software, a monitoring app, is put on a smartphone used by a child, typically because the perpetrator sees that as a way to track what the child's mother is doing. So this is troubling. It's something we need to be aware of. It's something we need to continue to work to combat, and it's part of our overall efforts to keep children safe online. So can I commend the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children for the important work you're doing. Can I say that you have the full support of the Australian Government, and that particularly when it comes to keeping children safe online, this is a very clear priority for the Australian Government. Our e-Safety Commissioner is doing important work in this regard. We've had governments of many countries come to us asking to learn more about how the e-Safety Commissioner operates, and we're always pleased to work with other governments and with non-government organisations to talk about how this model has worked and to cooperate together in global efforts to help keep children safe online.
I'm very happy to speak at this launch event where so many people from all around the world are united to end violence against children. We must do much more to achieve this goal. Under cover of the pandemic, predators are targeting our children. Child sexual abuse material and grooming online seems to be increasing, on top of an already exponential growth. In the last 10 years, from 1 million to 70 million reports of child sexual abuse material worldwide. The predator's business model fuels this increase. The price to watch child sexual abuse material is to provide new child sexual abuse material. In other words, to watch videos of children being raped, predators must rape children. As adults and parents, we are obliged to protect children. As political leaders and legislators, we are obliged to make laws to protect children. I want Europe to lead in the fight against child sexual abuse. And this is a moment of truth in that struggle. Police can rescue children because big internet companies voluntarily report child sexual abuse. But next week, the new EU Electronic Communications Code comes into force with an unintended effect. New privacy rules will block companies from voluntary reporting, and that's unacceptable. Privacy is important. We must defend privacy. But we must also defend the privacy of children and their safety. So I have proposed emergency temporary legislation to allow companies to continue their reporting. It's now up to the European Parliament and the European Council to approve these rules. And I'm optimistic that they will do the right thing and protect children. But I want to do more. Next year I will propose new permanent EU rules that will make it obligatory for internet companies to report child sexual abuse material. I will support the development of European technology to detect this material. And I want to set up a European centre to prevent and counter child sexual abuse, to work on prevention and to work with companies and law enforcement, to identify victims and bring offenders to justice, and to support victims. I will present proposals to fight human traffickers who force children into prostitution and rape. And today I call on you. You are leaders. You have influence. Put the fight against child sexual abuse high on the agenda. Too many children are being abused. Too few people realize how serious the situation is. A child has no power, but we have power. Let's use that power to protect children.
Thank you, Commissioner Johansson, and for that very clear and powerful call to leaders everywhere to use their power to protect children. We very much hope and expect that European legislators will indeed put children first and support the emergency legislation that has been proposed to keep children safe online. And we welcome your ambitious agenda for next year, including for new permanent EU rules on reporting online child sexual abuse material and for the creation of a European Centre to tackle child sexual abuse. I'm told there was a technical problem when we went from Minister Fletcher in Australia to Commissioner Johansson in Brussels. So let me just thank again Minister Fletcher for the great example set by the Government of Australia, including the creation of the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner, the first government agency in the world solely committed to keeping citizens safe online. Commissioner Johansson also mentioned tech-enabled detection, the importance of the tech and the telecom sectors in playing their part to keep children safe online. We're now going to go to the US and to the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of one of the largest communications companies in the world, the CEO of Verizon Communications, Hans Westberg.
I've frequently talked about all the great things that technology is doing in these days, bridging the digital divide and getting people to actually be part of our society. There are some challenges, and one is, of course, the abuse online for children. The work we're doing here at Verizon is important. We understand our responsibility as a public company. I mean, first of all, what we do is we work with technology to see that we can detect these type of information and photographies that is coming with child abuse. We work with NCMEC and all these organizations that can help us to do the right things, and with the latest technology that also is protecting privacy. Secondly, we also feel that we have a responsibility when it comes to advocacy, to educate parents and children how to use the technology, and even having parental control in our systems so we can really see that they can turn off and turn on for the children. And finally, what we also do, we work with the best organizations when it comes to child abuse in order to get learnings. We work with NCMEC, of course, but we also work with a childhood organization, and all of them giving us advice as a private company and a public company how we should address these things. For me, this is something very, very important. It's very, very important for Verizon that we continue to do the work and see that we are protecting our children. And I would give a challenge to all other private companies to really see how you can support this work and how you can work with the best organization to indulge this type of information and see that we're protecting our children for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans, for sharing the action that Verizon is taking to detect and remove child sexual abuse material from the internet, to educate parents, caregivers, and children to be safe online, and for the reminder to us all to be constantly learning from experts, doing what we do based on the evidence. And what a clear challenge you gave at the end to all private companies to step up and do more to end violence against children. We're now approaching the midpoint of today's launch event, and we want to hear from all of you on what you see as the priorities to end violence against children. You should now see a question appear on your screen with multi-choice answers. What is needed most to end violence against children? Please select 3 of the answers that appear on the screen. And later on in today's launch event, we will share the results of the survey. As you complete the survey in the next few seconds, let me begin to introduce our next leader. Earlier today, we heard from young people, vital voices to inform the design and the implementation of efforts to prevent and respond to violence against children. We're going to hear next from someone representing other vital voices, the vital voices of survivors. Dr. Daniela Ligero is the Executive Director and the Chief Executive Officer of Together for Girls, a public-private partnership which promotes data to inform advocacy and action to end violence against children, with a particular focus on preventing sexual violence against girls. Daniela recently completed a 2-year term chairing the executive committee of the End Violence Partnership, and she is also herself a survivor of sexual abuse. Daniela, thank you for joining us today and for sharing your story and insights with us.
Thank you, Howard. It's such an honor to be here. The author and survivor Christine Mcdonald once said, "There is solace in breaking our silence, a strength of spirit when sharing our truth. And it all starts with the choice to live on the other side of victim." For me, that choice came at the age of 15. I was on vacation with my parents and I didn't feel well, so I stayed alone at the hotel while they went out. And I saw a made-for-TV movie about a young girl who was sexually abused and how it affected her. That movie changed my life. You see, I too was sexually abused for several years, starting at the age of 6 by someone close to my family. Like most kids who are abused, I was terrified and ashamed, and I felt very alone for a long time. But seeing that movie made me feel, for the very first time, like I was not alone, and it helped me understand what I had gone through. That changed everything. That night, I had the courage to tell my parents what had happened to me, and it started a chain of events that transformed my life. I've spent the last 30 years on an amazing, sometimes tough, personal healing journey. Now, I know I'm one of the few fortunate ones. I had access to resources and education, a variety of services to help me heal. But one of the hardest parts of my healing has been letting go of the heavy shame I carried for a long time. So, over a decade ago, I decided to start sharing my own story widely. Not because I liked doing it, but because I was done carrying this shame. Because I wanted others to feel less alone and to know that there is hope, that you can heal. Ending sexual violence against children is possible, but change will only come if we use the data and evidence we finally have, if we work together to implement these solutions, and if we make some noise. As such, I want to congratulate the Global Partnership for all of their leadership and for recently approving 2 new seats on the board for networks of survivors of any form of violence against children. You see, I believe the time for a powerful movement of survivors and allies has come. As survivors, our background and experiences are varied, but we share a common knowing, what it's like to feel alone, to live scared, and to hold on to misplaced shame. But this is a burden we refuse to carry any longer. We return the shame to where it's always belonged, to perpetrators, to adults, leaders, and institutions that maintain the conspiracy of silence, to anyone that chooses to ignore the problem rather than face it head on. As allies, we stand with the survivors and victims in our lives and in our communities, and we are committed to change. Together, we are powerful. Together, we are tireless in a most basic pursuit that every child has the right to grow up free from the threat of sexual violence or any other form of violence. So to end, we call on bold and transformative action from leaders to make homes, communities, sport, places of worship, schools, and the online world safer for children. We demand prevention, healing, and justice. Above all, we must be brave so that all children can be safe. Muito obrigada. Thank you so much.
Daniela, thank you so much for sharing your personal story and for those action-focused insights and that call on leaders everywhere to be bold and be transformative in the action to keep children safe in every environment from sexual abuse. It's a really powerful reminder that behind the very large numbers we sometimes talk about, 1 billion children every year experiencing exploitation, violence, and abuse, that there are millions and millions of individual children and that they have experiences that no child should ever have to go through. And your story, Daniela, is so powerful because it's also a story of hope and survivorship and about your lifelong commitment to ending violence against children. Thank you so much for your leadership. From Daniela's powerful story and the insights there from an individual survivor and leader, we're now going to pull right out to the enormity of the Sustainable Development Goals, which of course include Sustainable Development Goal 16.2, the commitment that leaders made to end all violence against children by 2030. Our next leader was instrumental in negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals in the run-up to their agreement in 2015 by over 190 heads of government. And she now chairs the UN Sustainable Development Group. Let's hear now from Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations.
For 4.5 years ago, the UN Secretary General joined with global leaders and youth advocates to launch the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children. Today, it is the only global entity focused solely on SDG 16.2, ending all forms of violence against children. All children have the right to protection from violence, but tragically, physically, emotionally, and sexual abuse remain common. Violence can infect any setting in which childhood evolves, whether it be at home, in schools, or online. Sometimes socially accepted as a normal part of growing up, it is now understood that the experience of violence in childhood can have long-term impacts on mental health and well-being. And given its scale, such violence can undermine global progress across much of the Sustainable Development Goals. Disruptions linked to the COVID-19 pandemic have exacerbated these impacts and may have set back global efforts towards the achievement of SDG 16.2. To progress on the decade of action to deliver on the SDGs, we must bring renewed urgency and ambition to our commitment for a safe and secure world for children. I call on all sectors of society to mobilize at 3 levels. First, we need global action to secure greater leadership, more resources, and smarter solutions to end violence against children. Second, we need local action by governments, cities, and local authorities to embed proven violence prevention approaches in their policies, budgets, institutions, and regulatory frameworks. And third, we need action by people, including by children and youth, civil society, the media, the private sector, and academia, to generate an unstoppable movement that challenges the social acceptance of violence against children and pushes for transformation. By mobilizing everyone everywhere, we can create a world in which every child grows up free from fear and violence. In the city of Puerto Cortes, Honduras, 16-year-old Geraldine has been bullied repeatedly at school. She says, "I suffered physical abuse. I changed schools, but it went on." And she continues, "I was hit hard in the face. Nobody said I'm sorry. I became depressed and started cutting myself." And she adds, "I thought schools were supposed to support you, not destroy you." By demanding urgency and ambition, we can hold leaders to account and point out what is possible. And by supporting ideas and solutions, we can shine a light and scale up the interventions that are effective in preventing violence. Together, we can end violence against children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amina, for your leadership and for your inspiring, ambitious, and urgent call on us all to play our part, mobilizing locally and globally, but also leveraging people power to create that unstoppable movement you described to challenge the social acceptance of violence against children, the environment which allows violence, abuse, and exploitation of children to continue. With people power in mind, we're now going to hear from 3 leaders of global movements, each of them working tirelessly on different aspects of the violence against children agenda. Mabel Van Orange is the founder, and the board chair of Girls Not Brides, a global partnership of more than 1,300 civil society organizations committed to ending child marriage and enabling girls to fulfill their potential. Mabel, it's great to have you with us today. It's nearly 10 years since the elders launched Girls Not Bride. So where are we on ending child marriage? And what do you think we need to do? How do we get there? How do we get to 0 child marriage? Mabel Van Orange.
Thank you, Howard, for your kind words of introduction. I would like to ask all of you to imagine for a moment that you're a 13-year-old girl and you come home one day and your father tells you that you're going to get married to a man who you don't know, who you didn't choose, and who is actually a bit older than you are. Now, imagine that your wedding day is the day that you will have to leave school. Imagine that your wedding night is the night in which you will get pregnant, even though you're still a child yourself. And imagine that your wedding is the start of a life of abuse and violence, mental violence, psychological violence, at the hand of your husband and your in-laws. Now, unfortunately, this is what happens to far too many of the 12 million girls who get married every year before the age of 18. That's one girl every 3 seconds. And this is happening all over the world, across cultures, continents, religions, and countries. And the COVID situation has only made things worse. We've seen that because of school closures, because of job loss and poverty, more and more parents see forced to marry their daughters off at a too early an age. Now, Girls Not Brides, the global partnership to end child marriage, has nowadays 1,500 member organizations in over 100 countries. And these member organizations have learned quite a lot about the linkage between child marriage and violence against children. Let me share quickly 3 things. First of all, of course, one can argue that child marriage itself is a form of violence. But child marriage also leads to many forms of violence. Sexual violence, marital rape, psychological abuse. It's sometimes misused in order to have domestic, your child brides working as domestic workers. All these things are unfortunately things that happen in reality. Secondly, we've also learned that 37% of all girls and 36% of all boys in the age group between 15 and 19 actually think that a man is justified to hit his wife. And let me share a 3rd lesson. Gender plays a huge role in all of this because girls are disproportionately affected and they are the biggest victims. So what should we do? Well, unfortunately, there isn't a silver bullet. But on behalf of Girls Not Brides, let me issue 3 quick challenges to all of you. First of all, we must recognize the link between child marriage and violence against children. Because if we do so, and if we take that into account, then we will end up with a win-win situation. Secondly, we need to translate the unique realities and the actual needs of girls, whether they're married or whether they're at the risk of marriage, into all our policies, our laws, our funding decisions, and our programming. And thirdly, while we're acknowledging the role that gender inequality plays in all of this, we need to make sure that girls are actually at the heart of all efforts to end violence against children. So working together, we can end violence, and working together, we can end child marriage. Let girls be girls and not brides.
Mabel, thank you so much for those powerful words and those powerful statistics as well. I was struck here in a studio in Connecticut in the USA as I was counted back in by the production manager that even in those few seconds, a girl will be married on average, with the 12 million girls who get married before the age of 18 every year. It's so powerful, and I think your end point as well, and the call to action, and let's let girls be girls. And on behalf of the End Violence Partnership, I will certainly commit in the moment to that recognition that marriage and early enforced marriage of young girls is a form of exploitation, it is a form of violence and abuse, as well as the other linkages which you pointed out. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're now going to go back to Japan, where we're going to hear from Reverend Keiichi Miyamoto, who is president of Arigato International. Arigato is a global organization that brings together people of diverse religious and cultural backgrounds with a shared objective of building a better world for children. With its partners, Arigato recently convened the Global Week of Faith in Action for Children, including action to end violence against children. Let's hear now from Reverend Miyamoto, who has pre-recorded his remarks.
私たちはパンデミックが子どもたちに深刻な影響を与えていることを深く憂慮しております。ありがとうインターナショナルは子どもに対する暴力の解決を国際社会の優先課題とし、2030年までに必要な政治的、財政的な約束を促進いたします。2030 2017年にパナマで開催した GNRC 第5回フォーラムに非団体にご参加いただいたことに対して改めて感謝を申し上げます。フォーラムでは宗教指導者、市民社会団体、信仰に基づく組織や国際機関の代表など526名の参加者が子どもに対する暴力をなくすパナマ宣言を採択しました。主要な宗教指導者によって採択された初めての宣言であり、宗教コミュニティによる今後の取り組みの可能性を支持した10の約束が盛り込まれています。今年4月には子どものために行動する宗教キャンペーンを開始し、11月16日から20日まで今般のサミットの一環としてオンラインによるイベントを開催し、70以上の団体にご参加をいただきました。しかし、最も重要なことは、世界の子どもたちが宗教指導者やその他のリーダーとともに、世代を超えた諸宗教の対話に参加し、子どもに対する暴力について話し合ったことです。イベントの成果として声明が作成され、参加した組織の宗教者や代表者による行動への共同声明が取りまとめられました。宗教コミュニティをはじめ、国際社会や市民社会の団体が協力していく意思を示しました。パンデミックは、私たちは一人一人が深く結びついており、相互に依存していること、すべての人の人間としての尊厳は、世界の人間家族の中で守られ、尊重されなければならないことを思い起こさせてくれました。宗教コミュニティは、子供とその家族の精神的福祉を促進するという重要な役割を担っております。精神性を育むことは、この課題を根源から解決していく上で不可欠であり、今、特に必要とされています。私は国際社会に対して、すべての子供の精神性を育み、家族の精神的福祉を促進することの重要性を認識しています。宗教者と協力し、子供のための暴力を根本からなくしていくことを促します。ありがとうございました。
Thank you, Reverend Miyamoto, for articulating so well the vitality, the importance of faith and of spirituality, and the role of faith leaders, of faith-based communities and networks, and all that they do to help protect children, and the important agenda there. Our next leader, based in India, needs almost no introduction. Through his tireless work at the grassroots and the global policy level over more than 40 years, he has become known around the world for advocating and working to end child labor and exploitation. His foundation engages children as part of the solution, and he has liberated nearly 90,000 children from exploitation. We are privileged today to hear from Nobel Peace Laureate Kailash Satyati.
My dear young friends, sisters and brothers, as we know that our children are facing the grimmest crisis of our times, this is not simply a health crisis or economic crisis. This is the crisis of morality, justice, and civilization. We have seen throughout the history that violence affects our children most. May it be social, economic, political violence, may it be the structural violence, children suffer most. we know that if we don't act now, we may risk to lose the entire generation to this pandemic. If we don't act now, it is imminent that such a large number of our children would be trapped into child labor, slavery, trafficking, and millions would be thrown out of their schools and they cannot go back to their schools. We were hoping that the world would know and learn that we are interconnected. We cannot solve our problem without creating a culture of universal responsibility and globalize our compassion. But unfortunately, this is not happening. $8 trillion have been allocated for COVID-19 response fund by the wealthiest countries. But out of that, only 0.13%, not even 0.5% or 1%, 0.13% are allocated through the multilateral means to the most marginalized children and their families in the world. This is unacceptable. This is injustice. I would say that this is criminal. And therefore, if we have to end violence against children, we have to demand for fair share for our children. Several Nobel laureates, world leaders, and youth organizations, student organizations, teachers, workers came together for this demand that 20% of the COVID-19 response fund should be allocated for 20% marginalized children and their families. And not only that, in the post-pandemic time, this fair share should be a culture. Fair share should be a new norm, not only in budgetary allocations and ODAs, but also in making policies and their enforcement. Marginalized children must get their fair share. Next year, 2021, is the International Year for Elimination of Child Labor declared by the United Nations. This is an opportunity because child labor in any its forms is violence. It is the denial of human dignity and freedom. It is the denial of opportunities. This is violence. So we have to pledge it now or act it now so that we do not risk to lose our generation to child labor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kailash, for your leadership, for your tireless work to extract children from exploitation and to advocate for their education and well-being, for your passionate, clear demand for a fair share of resources for children, particularly marginalized children, and making that a new norm. We know right now that the resources which go into protecting children are grossly disproportionate to the size of the issue, but also to the return on the investment of preventing violence, exploitation, and abuse of children. And thanks, Kailash, also for flagging and reminding us that next year in 2021, we have an opportunity because it is the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. Before we move to our next leader, I just want to remind people of social media that this is being broadcast. And if you have heard something from a speaker, from a youth advocate, from one of our leaders that you find compelling, please do push that out on the social media channels which are appearing now on the screen. It's so important that those of us who have come together today from over 130 countries are pushing this out, raising awareness so people understand the extent of the issue, but that there are solutions and that there are committed leaders to making change happen and to ending violence against children. Our previous speaker, Kailash, also advocates for the universal right to education. School is, of course, a place where children should be safe to learn, to play, to develop. But for many children, school and sometimes the journey to and from school is fraught with fear and danger. Just a few days ago, a school in Nigeria was attacked. And as of today, a few hundred students from that attack are still missing. Our thoughts are with them and their parents, their teachers, their families. Violence in schools, as well as that kind of extreme form of violence, also includes bullying and cyberbullying, sex in returns for grades, corporal punishment, and more. And on top of all of this, education and learning has been significantly impacted during the COVID-19 pandemic. But there is a multiple win to be had. If we can end violence in schools, we will also improve learning outcomes. It's my great privilege now to welcome Alice Albright, the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Partnership for Education, to share her perspective and what she sees as the priorities to make learning safe for every child. Alice.
Good morning, good afternoon, Howard. Let me extend my greetings to everybody. We're having some technological issues here, so I'm afraid my camera doesn't work, but I'm hoping that you all can hear me. And it's thank you so much for inviting me to the summit for this very, very important launch. So before the pandemic, I met with a group of girls during a recent trip that I took to Burkina Faso. And they told me about the devastating, silent, in some ways, also pandemic that they face of physical, psychological, and sexual violence on their way to school while they were riding their bicycles. Since COVID struck, and many of you talked about this, violence in early childhood marriage had increased with devastating consequences. And we now fear that millions of children, as a result of this, may never, ever return to school. So ending violence is both a moral imperative and a very smart investment, in particular towards the recovery from the pandemic. GPE is supporting partners and governments to ensure education policy frameworks address safety in schools, make schools more inclusive, safe, and healthy, including through systematically monitoring violence and safety in schools. GPE's $500 million COVID response put learners' safety up front. That's the reason why we did it. We supported campaigns. Oops, can you hear me? There was a
Still talking. Thank you, Alice, for sharing your remarks and for battling through with the technological difficulties then. I want to pick up on a few further themes that are emerging during the event today, and that's that we've heard about specific action which is needed to make sure children are safe online, that they are safe to learn, as we just heard around that from Alice, but they're also safe from child marriage, from child labor and exploitation. And a cross-cutting theme that all of these require collaborative action, working across sectors and traditional boundaries, and that people power matters, that we must mobilize globally and locally and make all violence against children socially unacceptable. We've heard already today many actionable suggestions for what needs to happen to end violence against children. But how do we know we're doing it right? What's the evidence? What really works? Which interventions are the most cost-effective? How will we know if we're making progress? Our next four leaders will speak to different aspects of making sure that we're making progress. In May 2016, the World Health Assembly endorsed the first ever World Health Organization global plan to tackle interpersonal violence, in particular, violence against women and children. The World Health Organization continues to play a leading role in promoting evidence-based action to end violence against children. And it's my great pleasure now, and we'll hear from End Violence Partnership Board Member, Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus.
Dear colleagues and friends, the COVID-19 pandemic is a harsh reminder of the need to urgently accelerate our work to prevent violence against children. Calls to helplines, police, and other assistance centers have spiked during the pandemic, indicating an increase in child maltreatment and intimate partner violence against women. But violence is not inevitable. The evidence gathered in the Inspire 7 Strategies for Ending Violence Against Children package of interventions shows that properly implemented programs can reduce violence against children by 50%. The 2020 Global Status Report on Preventing Violence Against Children gives us reason for hope because countries recognize the need to take action, and cause for concern because levels of preventive coverage are extremely low. We have come together at the Solutions Summit to take action. That means that countries need strong coordination across sectors, to use data to set baselines and targets, to have fully funded national action plans, and most importantly, to ensure that prevention strategies reach the children that need them the most. Thank you, and I wish you a most successful summit series.
Thank you, Dr. Tedros, in particular for reminding us that violence against children is not inevitable. Violence against children is not inevitable. We also have the Inspire strategies of best practice to guide us, and the 2020 Global Status Report, led by the World Health Organization with partners, gives us hope and clear pathways of action, and prevention is best. We know that ending violence against children requires action across many sectors, including civil society. Global, national, and grassroots CSOs play a vital role, including research, delivery of critical services and interventions, and in advocating for rights, for laws, for policy change, and for investment. Plan International works in more than 70 countries to advance children's rights and equality for girls, and is also part of the Joining Forces Coalition and the CSO Forum to End Violence Against Children. Let's hear now from our next leader, Birgit Albrechtsen, the CEO of Plan International. Birgit.
Thank you so much, Howard, and it's lovely to be with so many champions to end violence against children today. I am indeed speaking on behalf of two large civil society coalitions, the CSO Forum and Joining Forces. And within these coalitions, we obviously, like so many of you, have recognized that COVID-19 has exposed existing inequalities and exacerbated vulnerabilities, deeply affecting the environment in which children, especially girls, are growing and developing. Up to 85 million more children may risk physical, sexual, and emotional violence than before the outbreak. Girls are particularly vulnerable, as also Mabel pointed out, to the increased risk of sexual exploitation and gender-based violence. And the impacts of the pandemic means an additional 1.5 million girls are at risk of child marriage over the next 5 years. Despite this, what we've unfortunately seen and has been called out today, efforts to end violence against children are chronically underfunded, and COVID-19 has only worked to exacerbate this. As resources have been diverted and the economic impacts of the pandemic hit, it is so essential that funding and resources for services which prevent and respond to violence and to child protection efforts more generally are seen as a priority to all actors. Civil society every single day have been at the front line of responding to COVID-19, and CSOs have delivered essential services throughout the pandemic to prevent and respond to violence. And it's so critical that CSOs continue to be recognized and are given access and seen as a vital partner going forward to end violence in communities. And as we build back better from COVID-19, we must make sure that civil societies and those they represent are at the center of our responses. In order to achieve SDG 16.2 and related goals and targets by 2030, urgent action must be taken to increase funding and resources for efforts to end violence against children, ensuring that civil society and children and young people themselves are at the center of these efforts. So let me leave you with three key challenges to ponder but not to ponder long on, but to take action on. First of all, listen to children and young people. Governments and international agencies and partners must formalize and fund processes to ensure meaningful and active inclusion of children in ending violence against children. Children and young people have the right to be meaningfully engaged in discussions that most impact their lives. We must invest in what works to prevent violence, scale up existing solutions such as Inspire strategies by integrating them into government strategies and plans which address violence against children. The evidence-based solution should be delivered through strong child protection systems, guided by policy solutions that mobilize multi-sectoral responses, as we have also heard from some of the government representatives today. And finally, we need to all call for increased funding to end violence against children. Governments must ensure that child-centered budgets and allocate adequate funding in legal and child protection systems, as well as infrastructure, to collect and share data on violence against children. And fund essential services and expand them. That's a must. Thanks, Howard.
Thanks so much, Ambigit, for joining us today on behalf of the Joining Forces Coalition and the CSO Forum to End Violence Against Children, from that very unequivocal message about the chronic underfunding and the need for us all to make the case for investment and to do so with urgency. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of the agencies represented through Joining Forces and the CSO Forum for the vital work they do to protect children globally and to advocate for change as we are doing today. Earlier, Dr. Tedros mentioned the Inspire strategies, which are widely regarded as global best practice to end violence against children, first published 4 years ago, but continuously evolving as the evidence base grows. Our next leader works on evidencing the implementation of the Inspire strategies. Professor Lucy Kluver of Oxford and Cape Town Universities is Professor of Child and Family Social Work and an Honorary Professor of Psychiatry. Lucy, it's great to have you with us today. We know that with COVID, and we just heard from Ambigit, we are facing severe constraints on budget, both domestic and on international aid. So my question to you today, Lucy, is this: can the Inspire strategies survive this economic crisis?
Well, thanks, Howard. I think we now have to ask 3 tough questions. The first is whether the science is strong enough. The second is whether we can actually reach the scale needed to reach over 1 billion children a year. And the third is whether Inspire strategies and violence prevention are a strategic investment beyond violence prevention alone. Well, let's look first at the scale, at the science. If we look and focus in on just one Inspire strategy of parenting programs, we see an exponential rise in the evidence. We can see here from the WHO parenting guidelines that there are now 77 systematic reviews and over 100 randomized control trials in low and middle income countries. They are consistently showing that evidence-based parenting programs are effective in preventing and reducing violence against children. If we move next and ask about whether violence prevention strategies can really reach global scale, well, COVID has shown that they can. An emergency collaboration led by WHO, UNICEF, End Violence, CDC, and a host of others put together evidence-based parenting resources, which in the space of 8 months reached 135 million families in 187 countries and have been used by 29 governments in their national COVID responses. Well, let's ask our last question. Is Inspire or violence prevention a strategic investment, especially for countries who are having to make hard decisions right now? Well, there's exciting new evidence which shows that it is. This is a study in South Africa of 1,000 adolescents living with HIV. And what we see is that key Inspire strategies, parenting support, government cash transfers, income and economic strengthening, and safe schools lead to substantive improvements on incidence rates of 7 SDG targets across 4 sustainable development goals. we see them positively impacting not only violence prevention, but also SDGs of health, gender inequality, and education. So what does the evidence tell us? It says that we have the science, we have the scale, and we have the strategic investment. The rest, I think, is up to us. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for the work you lead and for those important insights into how we might maximize the bang for our buck, if I can put it so crudely. We need more money, we have the evidence, we need to make the case. And it's great to get those insights about impactful interventions and how we might make the case that investing in ending violence against children is a strategic investment. And you very powerfully articulate how we need to collaborate in different and new ways, both within the end violence community, but beyond, with other sectors to combine for those strategic interventions. Thank you, Lucy. Our next leader is Dr. Joan Nainyuki, the Executive Director of the African Child Policy Forum, which works towards a more child-friendly Africa by promoting knowledge, dialogue, and advocacy for change. Dr. Nainyuki is also the Vice Chair of the End Violence Partnership Executive Committee. And I know that the African Child Policy Forum recently launched 2 great new reports, including an assessment of Africa's 30-year journey with the Africa Children's Charter. Dr. Nainyuki, or Joan, if I may, as far as it's possible to take a pan-continental perspective across such a diverse continent as Africa, from where you sit, what's it going to take to end violence, abuse, and exploitation of children across Africa?
Thank you, Howard. And good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be part of this unified effort towards our shared aspiration of our when no child suffers violence. In Africa, the prevalence of child marriage, as we have had, FGM, child labor, corporal punishment, sexual violence, exploitation, the list is endless. All these forms of violence threaten the well-being of our children. In many countries, national laws still do not explicitly prohibit all forms of violence. Deeply rooted social norms, economic and gender inequalities, armed conflicts, environmental disasters expose children to different forms of violence. Girls in particular, children with disabilities, children living in rural areas are the most affected. And we have seen with COVID-19, the modest progress we have made as a continent in reducing FGM and child marriage already at risk of being reversed. In spite of this, 2020 is still a year of great significance for nearly the 500 million children living in Africa, as it marks the 30th anniversary of the adoption of Africa's Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. There is progress in these 30 years, but we all need to do more and to act quickly so that all children can thrive and be safe. This anniversary gives us an opportunity for countries to renew their efforts in 3 ways, which I will highlight. To establish and enforce legal and policy frameworks that prohibit all forms of violence against children in all settings. To adopt and resource national action plans that prioritize violence prevention. And lastly, to coordinate the efforts by CSOs and communities and families to adopt the good practices they have identified. Key among these, listening to children themselves. In joining you to launch this Solutions Summit, on behalf of the African Child Policy Forum and the African Partnership to End Violence Against Children, I call upon African leaders to provide much needed political leadership that identifies violence against children as an emergency that cannot wait, and to back this with policies, sufficient budgets, strong enforcement, and accountability mechanisms. I call upon governments to ensure the protection of those children who need it most, to work together with partners from the grassroots to global level to put violence against children at the top of their social, economic, and political agendas, making it an issue that Africa can no longer ignore. Thank you.
Joan, thank you so much for joining us today. You had the unenviable task, in some respects, of speaking for the whole of Africa and what it takes to contribute and to actually achieve this agenda of ending violence against children across the whole of Africa. But thank you for that, and thank you for your powerful call to action to African leaders, in particular around the political leadership, the financing, the policies, the legislation, the inclusivity of children, and more. It's a very actionable agenda with steps that can and must be taken to protect children and prevent violence against children across Africa. Thank you so much, Joan. Immediately following the section we've just had on making sure we're making progress, it's fitting to now reveal the results of today's survey. You will now see on the screen what you all said is most needed to end violence against children. Because we have some data scientists and many experts on the call today, I don't want to pretend that this is rigorous. This is more of a pulse survey revealing some top-line answers and responses to your responses earlier on. Unfortunately, I can't see the results. I'm being told that implementation has come out as a key result, as well as political leadership and financing as well. As we near the end of today's launch for the Together to End Violence Campaign and Solutions Summit series, we're going to hear now from two final leaders who between them will help bring some of what we've heard together and formally launch the Summit series. The first, speaking from the unique vantage point of being the special representative of the United Nations Secretary General on Violence Against Children, is Dr. Najat Mullah-Majid. Najat, welcome.
Thank you, Howard. Dear friends, I am pleased to join you in launching a year of mobilization to accelerate action to end violence against children. We know the scale of the challenge. The 2020 Global Status Report Preventing Violence Against Children highlights that nearly 3 in 4 children aged from 2 to 4 years regularly experience violent discipline by their caregivers. Approximately 1 in 4 children aged under 5 years live with a mother who is a victim of intimate partner violence. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 13 men report having been sexually abused as a child. Just over 1 in every 3 children around the world experiences emotional abuse. These horrific numbers show the scale of suffering endured by children, now made worse by COVID-19. The direct impact of the pandemic as well as mitigation measures are putting us even further behind. As the Secretary General warned in his policy brief on COVID-19 impact on children, what began as a health crisis risks evolving into a broader child rights crisis. The pandemic is devastating the global economy, with up to 150 million people at risk of falling into extreme poverty by 2021, affecting mainly women and children. And we know that poverty is a driver of child marriage, child labor, child sexual exploitation, child trafficking. So all these child rights violations will increase along with the recruitment of children into criminal, armed, or violent extremist groups. As a pediatrician, I know the harm that violence and threat can cause to children's physical and mental development at any stage of their life cycle, be it in early childhood, infancy, or during adolescence. Violence has lifelong impact on the health and well-being of children, families, communities, and societies. We must avoid today's children becoming a lost generation carrying scars from the COVID-19 pandemic long after it has faded. Ending violence against children is needed now more than ever. We must ensure in the recovery from the pandemic that child protection is recognized as a life-saving and essential service along with health, early childhood development, mental health, education, and justice. The reinforcing links between strong social protection systems and effective child protection should be central to all countries' national planning. And policymakers should recognize that allocating budgets and strengthening services for the well-being and protection of children from all forms of violence is an investment in the future. As children have shown before and during the pandemic, and highlighted in a global consultation last week and today by Zara and Sarafina, they are active in guaranteeing their own and peers' protection. Children are part of the solution. So in everything we do for recovery, we must ensure children are actively involved. Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohamed highlighted in her statement that we have good foundation to build on with the 2030 agenda while building back better. The Sustainable Development Goals are mobilizing governments, civil society, UN system, private sector, international community, and children themselves through alliances, coalition, and partnerships to accelerate recovery. In their recovery planning, I call on all governments to invest in children by ensuring all have access to sustainably financed social protection systems linked to properly resourced child protection services. The passion and commitment of the speakers we have heard today is hugely inspiring, and our task remains more urgent than ever. But together we can end violence against children, and we must do it. Thank you.
Najat, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your leadership, for your passion, and your commitment. And I love the phrase that ending violence against children is more important now than ever. And I think some of what you said is borne out by the survey results, which I do now have in my hand. And the lesson there is never announce survey results when you can't see them yourself. But I think it very much chimes with what we've heard through today's event. The importance of political leadership, of more funding, of better implementation of existing plans and initiatives and laws, but also the voices of children, which has come through as a very consistent theme from the very start of today's event when we heard from Zara and Sarafina. As I mentioned earlier, the previous End Violence Solutions Summit was hosted by the government of Sweden and opened by Her Majesty Queen Sylvia in Stockholm in 2018. But more than 20 years ago, Queen Sylvia launched the World Childhood Foundation to safeguard the right of children to a safe and loving childhood, and to work in particular to reduce the risk of child violence and sexual abuse. I had the great privilege of attending the gala event to mark the 20th anniversary of World Childhood Foundation. And I recall Queen Sylvia reflecting there with some poignancy that she had not expected that so much would still remain to be done to protect children 20 years after she launched the World Childhood Foundation. Queen Sylvia has very kindly agreed to share some reflections with us today. Her Majesty, Queen Sylvia of Sweden.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to address you today. In 2018, I had the honor to inaugurate the first Solution Summit in Stockholm. Now, it is my great pleasure to launch the second Solutions Summit. Due to COVID-19, this summit will be a series of meetings that will culminate next summer in the Leaders event, announcing new commitments and collective actions. I accepted this invitation because despite all the great work being accomplished on global, national and local levels, I remain deeply concerned about the development regarding children's well-being. I founded the World Childhood Foundation in 1999 to fight child sexual abuse and exploitation. Already then, 2 decades ago now, we saw that the internet was being used to exploit children. But sadly, despite 20 years of hard work, we cannot rest on our laurels. Instead, we see a significant increase in harm being done to children online. Today, most children in the developed world and many children in developing countries spend as much of their day online as offline. And in both the digital and the physical worlds, children are under assault. Child sexual abuse images and videos are flooding the internet. In 2020, the number of child sexual abuse images is expected to double from a horrendous 70 million reported by tech companies in 2019. And this is happening at the very moment when the COVID-19 pandemic is driving children to spend even more time online. Please don't get me wrong. Digital technology and the internet provide great opportunities for learning, entertainment, and socializing. However, we also need to acknowledge that without adequate protective measures, children are at heightened risk of abuse. And ensuring their safety online as well as offline is our responsibility as adults. Children need to know that we will protect them, not their abusers. Childhood is a proud commissioner of the UN Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development and a board member of the Global Partnership. Together with partners like ITU, UNICEF, WHO, and the Global Partnership, we are hard at work on making internet safer for children. This year, Childhood and I had the privilege to launch the ITU's new Child Online Protection Guidelines. I also had the opportunity to speak at the Samina Council Leadership Summit and at the high-level UNGA meeting. Most recently, with Childhood Brazil, ITU, and UNESCO, we launched the Broadband Commission's Child Online Safety Report. And a year ago, in the pre-COVID era, His Majesty and I convened a roundtable of experts to explore how technology and the wonders of artificial intelligence might be used to catalyze child safety online. I frequently ask myself, are we doing enough to stop the universal epidemic of child abuse? Do we invest enough resources to stop the tsunami of child abuse on and offline? Dear friends, I'm afraid that the answer is no. We need to do more, much more. However, the good news is that now we know what to do. Above all, we need to continue to invest in the development of better, more impactful, and scalable solutions. This is the reason why the End Violence Fund needs more resources. At the same time, thanks to the Global Partnership and its 500 members and 30 Pathfinder countries, we have evidence of what really works and how we can collectively make a difference in millions of children's lives. Ladies and gentlemen, ending violence against children is not just a good cause. It is a promise, one that we have made to our children and ourselves. In 2015, all United Nations member states committed to end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against children by 2030. So with only 10 years to go until deadline, let us keep our promise. Let us make this a decade of action. Let us step up our commitments and our investments so that every child can have a childhood free from violence and that no child is left behind. I hereby declare the second Solutions Summit series open. Thank you.
Salut, je suis Jason Katia Mouiwa, jeune leader de World Vision depuis la République démocratique du Congo.
Hello everyone, I'm Lydia, 17 years old from Kenya. At now, I'm in school, preparing to end my final fourth year exam, but also fighting to end violence against children all over the world.
Hi everyone, this is Lamia Mim from Bangladesh. I am 60, a child activist and a student of 11th standard.
La COVID-19 a affecté mon pays et nous avons passé plus que 6 mois à la maison, restant confinés sans accéder ni à l'éducation ni aux soins.
Child violence is on the increase, and in Kenya, children are undergoing different forms of violence, from child labor, child marriage, child trafficking, child sexual exploitation, and child pregnancy.
Some of my neighbors also tried to motivate and almost influence my family for my marriage, but my parents are determined to let me continue my study. With a Child Forum member, we have stopped two child marriages in our area.
Nous les enfants, comme toutes les autres catégories de personnes, nous voulons aussi vivre une vie où nous allons nous sentir mieux et où notre opinion sera prise en considération. Parce que nous sommes aussi des personnes comme tous les autres et nous avons besoin que nos droits soient aussi respectés.
If I'm campaigning, why not you? If I can do something to end violence against children, why not you?
My prayers for you all who are working to establishing child rights and ensuring child well-being. Thank you.
We started and finished today's event with challenges from children. I hope that we've all been informed and inspired. I know that I have. Thank you so much to the youth advocates and the leaders who took time to share their perspectives and their calls to action with us all today. Thank you to everyone who joined from over 130 countries and for the work that many of you do every day to protect children and to end violence against children. Thanks also to our many partner organizations involved in making today's event happen. Particular thanks to the End Violence Secretariat team, to IDECO Productions and SA Video. But today's event is just the beginning, the launch of the Together to End Violence campaign and Solutions Summit series. Next year, and we hope the energy and inspiration from today will propel us into a series of affiliate events and initiatives all over the world, which will be a drumbeat towards a leaders event where commitments will be made. So let's take the inspiration from today to raise awareness, to share solutions, and to work together to advocate for the political and financial commitments needed to make sure that every child grows up safe and secure wherever they may live. Thank you.